Are you ready?
No.
Can you do it?
No. No, I can't.
You go out tired to see me face. Can't get me out of the race. Oh man, you say I'm in your face, and then you draw a bad card. Draw a bad card.
I make you draw a bad card. I make you draw a bad card.
Propaganda spreading over my name. Say you wanna bring another life to shame. Oh man, you're just playing a game.
And then you draw a bad card.
Draw a bad card.
And you draw a bad card.
You make wrong moves.
I make you draw a bad card.
Here we go. I want to disturb my neighbor, 'cause I'm feeling so right.
All right.
I'm really impressed that you know bad card.
I want my baby back, 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 baby.
Stop it. You go, I want my baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back, back. I want my baby. You have to say back to I want my.
All right.
I'll tap you when you
do. I want my baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back. I want my baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back. Come on, dude. Do
you know the top part? Do you know the top part?
I want my baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back. I want my baby back.
Just do it, man, please.
I can't fucking finish it. I'm just keep picturing the hundreds of people listening to this.
They're not listening. There's nobody listening.
I feel like this would be like a good sleep podcast. We could just do an hour of
I just want to do the part. Just please.
All right. Last time. This is the last time. This is the last time I'm going to try. Okay.
No.
I'm going to get it. I don't think I can do the top part. I want my baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back, baby back. I want my baby back, 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 baby back.
Barbecue sauce. It's not yet.
That was good. That was good enough. That was the best we're getting. We're done.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Come on, everybody. Let's scare El Pussycat.
This episode of Dopey is brought to you by Aloe Recovery Center. Now, before I do this ad, I have a question to ask you. Are you a drug addict? Are you using? Are you sick and tired of being sick and tired? Are you willing to go to any lengths to get better? And by any lengths, I mean go to California. If this describes you and you don't know where else to go, then you should consider going to Aloe Recovery. Aloe Recovery is this amazing rehab in sunny Southern California created by our friend Bob Forrest, his friend Evan Haynes, and their friend Bob. It was created as a place for addicts to receive compassionate care. Their motto is frickin' compassion, not control. So if you're tired of getting disrespected at treatment, which Bob Forrest was, and which frankly I was, then Aloe might be the place for you. They have amenities including surfing, sound bath meditation, fucking sweat lodge. You can sweat all that shit out of you. They have an amazingly comfortable detox. So if you're fucking sick as hell on highly addictive drugs, the detox is pretty comfortable. And I know that's very important. Mostly, if you're fucked and you want a place to go, you should check out Aloe. This episode of Dopey is also brought to you by listeners like you in the Dopey Nation. If you guys want Dopey to remain happy, joyous, and free, consider giving to the Dopey Patreon account. It's www.patreon.com/dopeypodcast. And giving money to the Dopey Podcast Patreon account makes Dopey better. It lets me buy more stuff. It lets me put more work into it. It lets me pay designers to make art. It lets me pay musicians to make music. It makes Dopey better. If you want to give $1 a month, that's great. If you want to give $2, that's great. If you're crazy enough to give me $100 a month, I'm not going to say no. So that's Dopey Patreon. If you guys want stickers, if you guys want hats, just Venmo me at Dopey Podcast. And enough ads. Here's the fucking show. Hello, and welcome to Dopey, the podcast about drugs, addiction, and dumb shit. And I'm Dave. And this episode is a kind of heavy episode. It's a very important episode. It's a very special episode. 1 year ago this week, our friend Chris overdosed and died. And I wanted to do a tribute to him. So this is that. It makes me think about, how tricky it is to make the show without Chris. It makes me think how much I miss Chris in my life. And it makes me think about how easy it is to die when you're doing drugs, when you're shooting drugs, when you're getting fentanyl or heroin and you don't know what's in it. And of course, Chris had been in recovery for 4 years, so it makes me think how easy it is to slip up. And that, your next shot can be your last, as they say. It makes me think all of that stuff, but it also just makes me sad because making the show was so much fun with Chris. And that's why I put those songs at the front. I just wanted you guys to remember how stupid and fun and pure the show was and how innocent it was and how innocent Chris was. And what a lovely person he was. And he was a great friend. So, in honor of Chris, for this episode, I have a bunch of his friends, a bunch of the guys who were at the wake last year. If you guys heard that episode, we have his sponsor, Dylan, his friend Colin, his friend Alex, his friend Mark, and Ted. And Ted is also his friend. And they basically just tell stories about Chris and what he meant. And it was very meaningful. I'm actually upstate right now. I'm at my dad's house in upstate New York. It's like fucking 100 degrees. And I drove to Great Barrington this week to sit with them and to record a show for you guys. So that's meaningful to me. And being on vacation, I kind of felt disconnected from you guys. And actually somebody, Kevin in Twitter was like, yo, where's Dave at? Meaning he felt my disconnection. And it just made me appreciate what we have. Dopey it means so much to me when I hear from so many people, and I hear so many good things, and I hear some bad things. Some dude just fucking emailed me saying that the show is too self-referential and self-absorbed, but whatever. That's the show. What am I going to do? The point is that Dopey is very special to me. It seems to be very special to a bunch of you, and I think the reason is, it's part of the reason we did the show in the first place, which is to show the dumbest shit we had done, and that we could be sober, and that we can laugh about it, and that and we don't judge how you live or what you do or if you still want to get high. You do what you do. The whole point of Dopey was for me and Chris to show you guys that we could be happy in recovery, that we had done all the drugs in the world, that we had fucking relapsed, we had OD'd, we had been to jail, we had seized, we had lost our families, we had lost our friends, but we could get sober and we could laugh about the dumb shit we had done, and we could be happy in recovery. That was the point. And here I am alone doing the show because Chris, something happened, because he's a drug addict, and I think he forgot how to stay sober, and he forgot how dangerous it was, and he overdosed, and he died, and he's gone. And I still make the show, and you guys still listen to the show, and the spirit of Dopey is very much alive, and his absence is a huge piece of the show in itself. So I just want to thank you guys for being a part of this thing. I wish Chris was still here. There's nothing I can do about that, and that's just the fucking truth of addiction. I want this show to be a remembrance of Chris and how much people cared about him, and I want you guys to get a glimpse into who he was. And that's the purpose of this show. So here's me and Dylan and Alex and Colin and Ted and Mark remembering Chris. I hope you guys like it. Hello and welcome to Dopey, the podcast about drugs, addiction, and dumb shit. And I'm Dave. And this week marks a year since Chris died. So I actually got in my car. I was on vacation with my family at my dad's house upstate, and I drove to Great Barrington, which proved to be a very scary drive for me because I'm not a very good driver. Anyway, I got Alex and Dylan and Mark and Colin and Ted, who are some of Chris's very, very closest friends, to do a little tribute to our friend Chris. So welcome back to the show, everybody.
What's up?
Hey.
Thanks, Dave.
Hey, thanks, Dave.
Hey, you're welcome, guys. Now, I'm going to start with Alex because you have to know something about Alex. I'm sure you guys know a lot about Alex that I don't know, but one thing about Alex that I do know is that, and I don't know if you know this, basically every time Chris and I did the show, we would be actually checking the mics. And if we had somebody calling in, Chris, before we would do the show, would call Alex. And he would call Alex where we were, and we would record you as the sound check of the show. Did you know that?
Kind of. I remember getting called a bunch of times, but...
There's another thing. That people who want me to have a co-host, Alex was on the show like once or twice, years and years ago, and people, random strangers to you, say, what about that kid Alex? Can you believe that?
I can't believe it.
Is that not beautiful?
It's beautiful.
So what do you think?
No.
No, I don't want you to co-host the show. What do you think about the fact that I think the reason that you were so good on the show is because you were so close with Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I knew how much the show meant to Chris, and the show in the early stages of it was essentially just an extension of mine and Chris's conversations on the daily, you know, which is what I kind of think it was with you and him as well. So, yeah.
And like I know that when he died, like you know, it was traumatic for you, and we talked about it the other day when you were talking about like what life has been like since he died, or what it was like being friends with him. You know what I mean? Like what around Great Barrington and recovery and like it's depressing, but hopes and dreams and all that shit.
Yeah, I don't know what to say to that.
You told me some beautiful stuff, man.
Yeah, and I don't know. It's tough to articulate something like that just in the moment, I guess. I don't know. I think that I try to look for Chris in like everyday scenarios, like in different moments throughout the day. And I guess something that was pretty cool recently, I haven't felt like a ton of success in like looking for him and like feeling a connection with him. But recently, me and my fiance were out in Rhode Island, and we were camping, and we went to the beach, and I guess I haven't been like to the ocean since Chris passed, and I was like just like in the waves and stuff, and I was thinking about him and some good times that we had, and I don't know, and I was like thinking like is Chris really like a part of everything now? Like is he like super meta? Like is his molecules or whatever, like his essence, like a part of everything now? Is like kind of what I've been trying to look at it as. And like in the ocean for like the brief, like maybe half an hour I was in the ocean or whatever, like I did feel that like super strong connection to him. And like, it was great, because most of the time anyway, it's like going around the town here, and just thinking about all the times like we had, and all, we used to go all these places together and do so much together that it's tough it was tough in the beginning, and it's still tough now to like something simple like going to the gym. Is you look over and you see him on the elliptical, and
Settlers of the town.
yeah, Chris is so funny. I always think about that whenever anybody's ever on the elliptical or talks about an elliptical. It's like he was the only person I knew who talked about it like he was riding the elliptical. you don't ride the elliptical. That's not a thing, and that was his exercise. Like,
Dude, that was his fucking whole reason for being.
and he would go on the elliptical so he could watch Law and Order. He would like time it specifically. Man, in his sweats, with like the tube socks over this. Yeah.
With the holy Miles Davis shirt.
Yeah, Chris was probably one of the most consistent gym goers that I knew, but like low key, like an elderly exerciser where he would just do the lowest amount of effort, but he would go daily, so he felt good about himself.
He always said he needed to sweat. Chris's whole he was like, I need to get a good sweat. He would always say that.
Yeah, so when he worked at the needle factory, I would wait for him to get out at like 11 o'clock. He'd come home, we'd eat Ben and Jerry's, we'd watch Walking Dead, and then we'd go it was like an overnight 24/7 gym, and we would go there after eating Ben and Jerry's and work out until like 3 in the morning.
I also want to mention that the pants that he was eating that Ben and Jerry's in, that he went to work out in, he referred to as his eating pants.
He actually, when we would record the show, he would wear those pants. He would come to Manhattan wearing his like khakis and his Brooks Brothers outfit, which was like his intern outfit. And he would get to the house and he would take off his pants and put on his eating pants to record the show.
Yeah, he would literally sometimes come home with like takeout, and before he ate it, he would say like, "Hold on, I got to put on my eating pants." And
Would
he would
he
like
really
go,
do that?
Yeah, like no, dead serious.
It was always, I have to slip into something more comfortable. And he'd, like, go to his bedroom.
I mean, Chris, it's funny because obviously, like, whoever listens to the show has this feeling of who Chris was. And Chris was all the things he was on the show. He was charming. He was super smart. He was ridiculously funny. He did ridiculous things. But his essence was so much more. You know what I mean? Like, he was just like, it's so weird to me to be here because something inside of me that makes me sad about it, I mean, besides the fact that he's dead, is like when I pulled up into Great Barrington, you see the GB and you see all the nice shit. It's a nice fucking town. And it's like, part of me was like, if he had stayed here, this wouldn't have happened. Do you guys ever think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I for sure do. I guess you never know what would have happened. I know that both times, you know, Chris, he referred to this place as like the source. It was so important for him, and he did really well when he was here. And both times that, you know, he was here for the first time around when I met Chris, we met in Mountainside like 8 years ago. He was sober for a few years and eventually got this job in New York, went to work at a sober house in New York. And so it was after like years of sobriety here in the Berkshires, and he went to New York, and then things fell apart. It went to shit. I kind of told the story last time I was on about, you know, when Chris relapsed, eventually came back to the Berkshires, we called the cops on him, brought him back to rehab, and then he came back here again and did good for another few years, and then he, you know, went to Boston, went to school. And so, I mean, who knows if he would have stayed sober or not had he stayed here, but he did really well here.
Right. And what about, I mean, another thing, for me, because I straddle, you know, grief, and I get angry, and I feel sad. I go through that. I feel sad, and then angry, and then grief. Like, and I get angry because when I listen to this show, Chris really like preaches recovery on the show. He preaches like what you have to do and why you have to do it, and like, I don't know. It makes me crazy to. I mean, I guess that's par for the course when you work with addicts in general, right? You see somebody doing well, they don't stay doing well every time, right?
Yeah,
Dylan, what's your take on this, Dylan?
Yeah, no, of course, man.
You're just looking at me nodding. I need you.
Dude, I totally agree, man. And I don't know. This is like conceptualizing this year after Chris is so much bigger than my little fucking mind can handle right now. And it's like the same things of anger and grief, and also remembering him with joy and fondness, and then being here with all the people that were closest to him. And yeah, dude, I'm fucking like, he seems to have been, in retrospect, one of the sickest. Like
absolutely,
one of my favorite clinicians ever used to say he had a virulent strain of addiction.
Right.
And that like the second he was disconnected from either his, like, whatever his treatment plan, for lack of a better word, seemed to be, like, he just fucking veered off the rails so fast. And, like...
Yeah, and he was somebody, and I guess this is how a lot of, like, addicts work, is that when he was connected, when he was doing the shit he had to do, he was so good. And he was so good at actually maintaining that routine. I remember when I first lived with him, he was working, I'm sure he's talked about this, he worked at BD, that syringe-producing factory. And he was working these, like, overnight shifts, these horrible hours, this horrible fucking job, going to meetings every day. Like, he was just so good at, like, when he had a system down, Chris was really fucking good at doing it. Just like when he was working out all the time. Like, he was really good. And then that kind of gets taken away and things fall to shit. And when he's doing it, like, Chris is somebody who is capable of achieving, like, such high, you know, good things in life. Like, he had such a high potential. And then, yeah, so I don't know. It's just crazy.
One of the things he had said on, you know, one of the episodes, kind of 10 episodes out, I don't know if he was I can't believe he was relapsing when he said it, but he was talking about the last time he had fucked it up and what was different. And he was like, well, I wasn't really going to meetings. I was kind of just hanging out with my girlfriend and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, what are you doing now? And he goes, well, I'm not really going to meetings, but I'm going to work. And like, it was just such a parallel, but he didn't see it. And like, I just wonder what happened, you know, like when it slipped back in, when he thought he could get away with it, if he thought he could get away with it, like, because, you know, we were doing a show about addiction and recovery, and we were talking about staying clean on a weekly basis. We were hearing from, you know, many people in you know, America and over in the world who would write Chris and I with questions about how we dealt with this or that. And Chris responded to most of them. I look at old emails now and I see Chris's responses, and they're all about like working a program and what he did and how he changed and all of these things. And then somehow the bottom dropped out and we didn't see it. Or when we saw it, he was so quick to cover it up, we believed him. And that's really scary. You know, it's a scary, and obviously it's fucking sad because he was our friend, you know? Anybody who has to, I mean, Colin, what do you think? You got anything on this one?
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely a surprise for me. I was with him a week before it happened out in Boston, and there's always that feeling of like, because of what happened the last time in Ted and I's apartment, the last time he relapsed, there was always this like...
Tell that story. Just tell that story.
Yeah,
please.
I mean, he went to so me, Ted, and Chris, we met in rehab 8 years ago, and we just became like this. We became this unit, you know. The three of us just stuck together, and we're like from completely different parts of the country, different stories, different ages, but like there was just like some type of connection that like brought us together, and we all had this like this drive in some way to make this work and to like get out of where we were, and we helped each other out, you know. So we lived together. Eventually he moved to Brooklyn, running the sober house down there, and it didn't work out for him. And
But before his relapse, he was like, the three of you were all about recovery together. It was the thing you were into.
Yeah,
I mean besides eating and exercising. And stuff.
Yeah, and the three of us had our different approaches with that, and it seemed to work for us. And yeah, something. I mean, he moved on, and that was like an exciting thing. It's exciting to see friends who are sober like move on and grow, and that's how we saw it, you know. I mean, he was running a sober house, you know, like that. Like when you're in early recovery and somebody offers you that, like that, you perceive that as like this positive thing, and it was, you know. But yeah, it didn't work out, and he ended up back in our apartment. And kind of like what Dylan said, that like extreme strain of addiction. And we heard the stories. We heard the Dopey stories on the back porch at the rehab, but like we never saw it. And that's the thing. Like when you meet people in treatment in AA, you hear the stories, and it's hard to like put that together until you see it in front of your own eyes, you know. And we saw it right in our faces. And yeah, we had to call the cops, and it was scary. It was a scary thing, and it became real, you know?
Right. I mean, I had heard every story, and I never, you know, I never used with Chris. I never got high with Chris. He wanted me to get high with him, like on one of the times where he was using and I wasn't using. But then we did the show, and it was like, I just took it for granted. I was like, we're sober. And like when he was not sober, I just thought he wasn't interested in doing the show anymore. I just thought he had so many other things to do, and that's what I was looking at basically. And you know, it reminds me of the time where you know, and it's like even to bring this up among you guys, because like we never talked about it in person. Maybe we talked about it after his wake, but when Ryan called me because Chris had called Dylan and thought he was talking to me or whatever, and then we were all sure that something was going on, and then Chris lied his ass off, and we all accepted it because Chris was so busy. And how easy it is for an addict, you know, smart, dumb, whatever, to fly under the radar. I just wonder with this whole thing, like, I guess nothing else could have happened because this is what happened. But, like, I guess, I mean, I'm lost.
Well, I guess, I mean, what you just said, that, like, you know, we knew something was up, and then we talked to him, and he lied his ass off. And I guess that's what addicts do, because when he relapsed, when he said he had to come back he was living in Brooklyn, things weren't going well. I think he relapsed at one point and said he wanted to come back and stay with us, just a place to stay temporarily. And so we brought him back, and he's like, yeah, you know, I've been sober for a few weeks now. And he was so fucking convincing because he stayed with us for, I don't know, maybe a few days or a week or two. And he finds out he was getting fucked up the whole time. But he was so, like, to our faces. I mean, he was so, and that's how we are. You know, that's how drug addicts are. But he was so unbelievably convincing that it wasn't until he was at the point where he had, like, drank a fifth, where he was so obviously fucked up that we knew that he'd been getting fucked up this whole time. And then he tells me, you know, he was buying drugs online. I had to go in his car and get rid of. He had everything you could imagine.
Right.
And he was doing it all, like, right under our noses. And he was still that, like, maybe there's part of me that was like, I think something's kind of going on. But it's just so, like, he was just another level, too. So,
but that was really what I wanted to say before. It's like, that was the last time, and then he got his life back. And he was succeeding way more than he had ever succeeded at this point. He had finished his master's program. He was living in Boston. He was, you know, working in different places. He was getting respect. He was turning up in places where he had respect. And I know for me, I mean, my consequences are I lose my kids, I lose my house, I don't see my kids. And, like, I mean, I don't want to get high, but, like, the idea of losing that, it's like, I don't want to get high. You know, I don't want to lose it. I just thought that with what he had lost, the consequences would be right there. But for some reason, they weren't right there in his head. You know, and what do you guys think that's about?
So the thing that like kind of rattled me with it all was, I mean, he had time, like you said, he was doing all these things, and, like, at what point do you give a friend or somebody that you know is in recovery the benefit of the doubt, you know? And that, I mean, that rattled me to my core. Like, I have a lot of friends who have a lot of time. I have time, and, like, and you get sober to acquire this freedom to do all these things and to not be questioned constantly by your parents, by your significant other, and not have people walk on eggshells around you. And I don't know, and that's what I thought about. I'm like, I felt like Chris, like, earned that trust back. You know, it was 4.5 years later, and yeah, there were some sketchy things, but and that's the battle that I constantly like kind of live with, is, like, at what point do you, like, step in and say, like, something's going on? What if something isn't going on? He's got all these other things going, like, these positive things in his life, and I mean, I'm allowed to say this because I already asked, but I mean, he did a fifth step with a sponsee a week before he died, and his sponsee and I just did the fifth step on the year anniversary of doing that, right? And we talked about that. He, like, for somebody who's actively using, it's not like he completely stopped doing the things. He was doing the things, and, like, where's the line where you step in, or where you take a step back, or you have that trust, you know?
Dylan, what does that make you think when you hear that? Just like the idea, like, that Chris, like, what is that when you do a fifth step with a sponsee and you're high? Like, what does that mean?
I mean, I think wheels are off once you're high. And you can be anything from a one-way flight to Colombia or taking a fifth step. I think with Chris, It was just rolling the dice, and whichever number came up was what the action was going to be.
Right.
But he obviously had so much momentum going that was going to be, like, he was going to fight till the end, clearly. He had so many things that he loved intellectually. But this whole thing makes me curious. It makes me want to conceptualize his whole trajectory and what the fuck happened. And now there's 2 points. There's 2 data points to analyze. Not that I'm right, not that it's worth it, not that it's whatever. It's a trivial exercise, but at the same time, it's almost like, the way I see it now is, it's like, I almost think about Chris as having an extraordinary amount of shame for some reason, in that when he showed up here, I think the source for him was the first place where he felt completely not judged and safe in a group of people. And I don't think we're necessarily an extraordinary pocket. I think he landed in a pocket that worked for him. And I know there's these pockets that are all around the country where people support each other unconditionally. And I think for him, the ability to call his pants his fat pants, and for him to like be who he was to the fullest essence, and with you, Dave, to be who he was in front of 10,000 people on Dopey, I think that the combinations of those were so important. But I think for someone like Chris, he like the second he stepped away from that and had to put on a mask, I think that little piece of shame was like, it was malignant within him. And it was for whenever it wasn't getting direct radiation of like, this thing is being treated on a daily basis, his shame and his kind of like this self-questioning. And I think he saw like potentially a lot of wasted time or a lot of negative impacts on a family that was incredible. I think the second that stopped being treated, that thing started to grow immediately. And then once it passes like the event horizon of his addiction, there was no coming back. So 3 weeks before that happened, before he died, I remember pulling him aside and being like, dude, like when he was just so busy, I had no other thing other than he looked really busy. And I was like, make sure you're like being honest with people about what's going on, take time for yourself, slow the fuck down, stop trying to prove everything. Like, dude, just be a guy at some point here. You don't need to take over the world today.
And what did he say?
Yeah, dude, no, totally. I know this just all this stuff came up. He had all the right answers, which is the same shit I would say.
But the best thing was like when the red flags all popped up, and I think a bunch of us were in those conversations, and I spoke to you for the first time. Or no, we spoke on the phone on Dopey, but you said to me, dude, I'm going to get in my car and drive to Boston right now. You know what I mean? And like, it's just like, it's crazy that like he went under the radar and we believed it. And then it's like we have an audience of mostly people who use drugs or who just got out of it. And we have our friend who just died. And it's like, so this is a really, forget the fact that Chris was amazing, started Dopey, this is his show, you guys love to listen to him. This is like a study, like you're saying. It's 2 data points of what relapse looks like and how relapse can kill you. It's like, I was around drugs forever and ever and ever, and it wasn't until I got sober that my friends started dying. Todd was here, like probably down the street right before, like 2 weeks before he died. Chris was here all the time right before he died. And this is the place where people come to get better. I can't imagine the pressure that you guys are under who work with these people, like it seems very scary and sad. I guess all the good, the success, like what happens? Like how do you guys navigate successes and failures with this thing?
Alex?
Jesus. All right, I'm going to sidestep that question real quick. But I was thinking about what Ted was talking about with, Chris's previous relapse. And I have a couple points that I wanted to make about it. Like Chris's stories and all of our stories, really, like they're so funny, and there's so much humor in them when we're telling them. But when they're happening, like they just come off as sad. It's just like super sad, and that was like a good example of it. And something that me and Chris always talked about and like related about was that the stories that we tell each other, we can't really like talk to our dads about. Both of us have had a similar reaction when we kind of bring things up like that to our dads. And it was an interesting thing that we really shared a connection over. But also, I wanted to talk about when Chris relapsed that time. First, the state of his car, which Ted probably can give you more in depth.
I can give you very in depth into the state of his car.
Yeah, and then. So Chris was super drunk driving around like Connecticut, and he reaches out to this guy who was like a holistic, like mind, body, spirit, like person who Chris met in recovery, and he's attempting to get this guy to trip on acid with him. And I love thinking about that. It's just like so funny that that's what he comes up with in his head when he's like cocked. It's like, I'm going to reach out to this guy and see if he will trip with me, And anyway, the thing I love about his car, though, that in that moment was like, he wound up vomiting all over the place. But going through his car, he had 2 different sets of French fries in his car from like 2 separate fast food restaurants. Yeah, like I don't know. I love that for some reason that he just like he was going to all these different fast food restaurants, like different kinds of French fries. Like I don't know.
What were the kinds?
Oh, it was Burger King and McDonald's. But it's just like, like I don't know why do you need to have like two things of French fries? And I don't know.
What was also hilarious about his car is that he had all the fries, but he vomited everywhere, like projectile vomited all over the dashboard. And in order to like cover it up, he thought it was a good idea. He had a bottle of cologne. He thought it was a good idea to just literally open the bottle of cologne and just dump it in his car, like spread it everywhere, like all over the seats,
That's
like
the best.
all over the car, right? So yeah, that whole night was crazy. He came home. I told the story last time. We ended up like calling the police on him. But the funny thing was, my car had broke down like that day, and so we took Chris to rehab. And then for the next like week, he told me I could use his car, and it was like it was the only way I could get to work. So I was literally driving his like cologne vomit infested car around for like at least a week, and then I eventually got it detailed for him. But it was crazy. It was disgusting. And the funny thing about it is that even after we got it detailed, for the next, I don't know, that car probably still has this in here. There's literally like puke, like crusted his seek buttons to like, change stations. They were literally stuck out. Like you had to like push them really hard and you would hear like a crack because it would kind of like insert and then the puke would kind of crust off and then it would seek. And it's just still in there, like all in between all the little cracks in his dashboard is like dried puke for like the next years.
And that's the wreckage of his past. Is the vomit is the wreckage of Chris's past. Chris, but Dylan, you said something that I think is interesting. The thing about shame, because like one of the funniest things about Chris was like, I guess it was a pocket where he didn't feel shame. He didn't feel shame here. He didn't feel shame on Dopey. He didn't feel shame amongst his people. But I guess there was actual shame in the real world. But he wouldn't talk about it as shame. In fact, we did an episode once, which I was really excited to do. It was going to be the regret episode. And I have like 1,000 regrets, like just the dumbest things to real, solid regrets. And I went through like, I wish I had been in a better band. I wish I had thought I could sing better. I wish, just dumb regrets. And I said, Chris, can you mention some of your regrets? And he said, I don't have any regrets, he said. And I said, really? He said, well, maybe I wish I had been a better athlete in junior high school. And that was his regret. Like, and I asked him about shame, and he said he doesn't have it. And like, do you think that was a lie, or do you think it was like, what is it?
I'm not surprised that the guy who was able to convince Ted and Colin that he wasn't getting high, and the guy that got me to not go to Boston was able to pull one over on shame, because that's like,
yeah,
I'm not. So I don't. Shame is, I'd say, like probably different than a regret. Also, there seems to have been at times. It manifested itself in interesting ways. Like he wasn't. His kind of desire to not play the games that like regular people played, which I admired and we connected on in a lot of ways. Like his always getting like a 4.0 basically, but like joking about how stupid everything was and how kind of meaningless most of what he was learning is. Not that, the school was good.
His favorite thing to do, like if he did anything and it smelled like there was effort, he felt shame about having any sort of effort. Like if we were doing something, like the show would be in a good spot, he would have to say before we did it, he'd go, yeah, me and Dave just took a second to write a few ideas down, but we don't really spend time on it. Or like if he wasn't doing well in school, he'd be like, well, I don't put enough time into it. He needed to, it was incredibly important that nobody thought he was trying to do anything.
Exactly, yeah. I think that Chris genuinely didn't care about a lot of things, but he also loved people to think he didn't care about anything, and I think he cared a lot more than he would like you to believe. I think he was a really like pretty easygoing guy, like really like things didn't bother him maybe as much as they would other people, but they still definitely did. But he loved to play the card that like he didn't give a shit about anything.
Whatevs, right?
Yeah.
My favorite. It's so funny to me because like I met Chris when I met Colin. It was like, what was that? Like 11 years ago now. 8.5 years ago in Connecticut at Mountainside, and Chris and I barely spoke. We hung out that week, and he was like Mr. Weirdo, eating multiple cereals in the bowl, big spoon, big eyes. Nobody else would be in the cafeteria but him. And then over the course of years, we would talk very sporadically. And it wasn't until that things weren't going right for him that he really, became my friend. And it was in his woman crisis. This woman broke his heart, and he was calling me every day, asking me what he should do. And vulnerable Chris, not knowing what he should do, Chris, was the best Chris, because it was so real and so fun and just real. You know what I mean? He was so heartbroken that he didn't have time to put on a show. And that Chris was just it was so amazing. And I was telling these guys the story, and I just want to tell the story because I think it's so funny. Annie was Chris's girlfriend when Chris died. And I talked to Annie from time to time. She's doing well. She loves Dopey. She loves you guys. Whatever. Before he was with Annie, he was with Annie's roommate, this woman Olga, and that wasn't even her name. That's what we just called her because he was scared of whatever. And Chris had this encounter with Olga where he didn't perform sexually, and he called me at the time. And we were laughing about it so much, and he was really bummed out about it, but he knew how funny it was. So then that week on the show, he came on the show to tell the story, and he was so heartbroken about Olga that for some reason in his sick head, he decided that if he told her to listen to Dopey, that she would fall in love with him because he was so vulnerable about her on the show. And of course, when she listened to the show, she was like, "You're fucking crazy. Get this show off the air. I can't have people hearing this intimate story about me." And Chris wound up taking that piece off, which was it was literally just the funniest thing because it was him owning his shame, and that was the best part of Dopey, was laughing at the story that you're not supposed to laugh about, almost to reclaim it. That was the idea of the show. And I love that one. You know what I mean? I don't know. If it's disrespectful to anybody that hears it, I apologize. I say it only with love and reverence for Chris. And when Chris was the most honest he was his best. And he helped the most people, and he was the best friend to people. Yeah.
Just in light of that, that's one of the things I miss the most about him is that he cared so much about people, but it was in that careless fashion. There's throughout the years, there's always been certain people I would go to with certain things, right? They're like Ted is the therapeutic, just very empathetic, advice. Dylan's very logical. Mark is just good for a laugh, but also very caring. Alex more kind of a mixture of Ted and Dylan, but I would always go to Chris, I just did, when I didn't really need advice, I just needed somebody to, just lighten the mood a bit, and that's what I miss. Yeah. That's what I miss about so much. This past year there's been a lot of tough stuff going on in my life, and I just miss that, going up to his room, sitting on his floor while he's laying down on his bed watching Netflix, and just spilling my guts out to him, and then him just saying something stupid for me to just get over it, or or let's just go get some food, just not having to dive deep down in, but just knowing that he cared a lot. Yeah. And I just want to add one quick story with that. I told his parents this, or I sent them a letter right after he died about how I met Chris. We were in the same group in Mountainside. I was in Mountainside. I lied about what I was there for. I said I was there for just drinking. I was withdrawing the whole time on opiates. Stealing from pharmacies, including my family pharmacy. There was a lot of shame behind that. I just didn't, and I wanted to protect that desperately. I meet Chris in the smoking porch. He's telling me these crazy stories. I want to fit in. I feel I just needed to fit in some way. So I start telling him kind of sheepishly about this pharmacy scam thing that I was doing, and he thought it was hilarious. And we just had this back and forth.
Colin, tell the pharmacy story.
Family owns pharmacies. I'd fill the scripts of dead people. Yeah. So I would just wait. Yeah, exactly. 8, 9. I would I would come in every day for work with my lab coat, my shirt and tie, and with the newspaper, read the obituaries, find the patients or customers that would die who are on hospice. As soon as they would die, I would immediately fill their scripts and forge it that their family picked it up the day that they died. So that was like one of the ways.
And what was Chris's reaction to that?
Oh, he thought it was hilarious, and he wanted me to tell like other ways I did that. And like I thought this was this like smoking porch like confidential thing, right? So the next day we go into group, and like Chris is just catching a lot of heat from the therapist because he just like didn't give a fuck. He was just like kind of like making fun of other people, and like the therapist like really got on him and said he was going to send him to this all men's like Christian rehab in upstate New York if he didn't like get his shit together. And like he responded by like saying like, oh, you're putting all the focus on me, but you got this kid over here who's stealing from pharmacies, doesn't even fucking tell you that. And I just like looked at him like how could you do that to me? And that immediately like sent my therapist into a frenzy, sat me down. We like added up all the time that I would do in prison, and like I fucking hated him because of that. I fucking hated him,
Right.
dude. Like,
but he made treatment worth it for you.
Oh yeah,
by delving that up.
Totally.
Like,
I mean, in hindsight, and like I didn't talk to him for like a week about that, and he'd always go up to me and be like, "Come on, man, come on. It was gonna come out in the wash anyway. You're gonna get arrested anyway when you get out of here." And it saved my life, man. And like that was the thing. Like there was a part of him, like maybe it was like subconscious, but like maybe he was just cracking jokes and wanted to like take the heat off of him. But like as I got to know him more, like he cared about other people. He cared about like why he did this podcast. That's why I always pushed it like, let's talk about recovery, and you didn't want to talk about it at all in the beginning.
Yes, in the beginning. But then he got upset when I wanted it to be more about recovery.
Yeah.
And I also think that after he died, after he relapsed, he didn't want to talk about recovery at all. Mm-hmm. He was like, we're talking about too much recovery. Let's just hit him with the Dopey. Mm-hmm. Because he was using. Man, that story is crazy. And it also makes me think, though, because I would go to Chris with all of my problems. And I had really deep, terrible problems that he had no, like, any sort of scope of dealing with them. And he would hit me with, like, don't worry about it. And I this is why Dopey was good in the beginning. I was like, how can I not worry about it? And I would keep going over and over with him again until finally he would, like, give me, like, advice based on 12-step stuff. He would quote passages in the book that would help me. Like, it was when I exhausted his laissez-faire attitude that the real Chris would emerge. And it was always, like, so helpful. And, like, when I was doing well, he would really come. When I was doing badly, Chris was the best for me. And when I was doing well, he would fucking dog me for all the same stuff, which was just awesome.
Yeah, totally. I think Colin just kind of summarized it pretty well. I think one of the best things about Chris, and I'm kind of like, I guess I've always known that, but I'm really like reflecting on it right now, is that like, yeah, you would do some, like, I did some fucked up shit in my life that I was really, like, ashamed of. And, you know, I was new to recovery, and, like, and telling that to Chris, and he just thought it was so fucking funny. And, like, to an extent, yeah, it's kind of fucked up, but it also made me kind of, like, lighten up about it a little bit. You know, like, I wouldn't beat the shit out of myself for, like, doing these horrible things, which, yeah, like, I needed to make amends for, but he just helped lighten the tone. Like, it's just ridiculous shit. It's not who I am now. It's some shit I did in the past, and he just, you know, lightened things up a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like that was a big gift that he had. Now, I was thinking about the shame that Dylan was talking about, and I think about when he first passed. You know, I didn't understand why he wouldn't have said something to me. You know, like, or any of us, but like, you know, personally, I felt like we could talk about anything. You know, so why would he not? Like, if he's struggling, why would he not mention this? And I think, and then, like, I don't know, maybe a week later, I was thinking about it, and I was like, it kind of dawned on me. I was just, like, all the shit that he's been through in his life, and with all these rehabs, and, like, you know, tragedy pretty much, and unsuccess, you know, that, like, he had finally, you know, he had been sober for years. He was doing so well externally, you know, and he had so much, like, he had gained that credibility that we were all talking about before, and, you know, I get it. Like, I feel like it's a hard and, like, kind of terrible truth about addiction is like the relapsing shame, you know, like how was he supposed to come to anyone really and be like, I fucked up again, you know, like I just feel like that if I put myself in his position, that would be the hardest thing to do, is to admit that like he wasn't doing as well as, you know, he's actually doing really bad, you know. I don't know. I feel like that's like this fucked up part about addiction recovery is that shame about not being perfect in it, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I do know what you mean. I think it's just, you know, this is very odd to me, and I also want to explain to the Dopey Nation what exactly this is. We are in Dylan's apartment on Main Street in Great Barrington. There's 6 of us on 3 mics, so we're passing the mic. So if there's any, like, audio issue, it's my fault because I don't have good enough mics, and it's blame me. I think when it comes down, I know that whenever I went out, I would disappear, but I never had to answer to anybody, really. I didn't have to do a podcast every week. I didn't have to show up in a sober house and run it. You know, I didn't have to, like, do a 5th step with a sponsee. You know, if I went out, I didn't have to answer to anybody. And I know that Chris would say to me all the time with Dopey that it was kind of like something that kept him sober, that it was something that helped keep him sober, that it was something that he had to answer to. And, you know, I can't put myself in his shoes to say I would have come out, I would have did this or that or the other thing. I think no matter what we come up with in terms of what happened with him, obviously we're here because we loved him. We're here because he was such a joyful, amazing, strange person that we got to, like, share a little bit of our life with. It's just, it boggles my mind that his is over. You know, it boggles my mind. Like, I think about him on a daily basis. Like, I probably would have thought of him pretty often if Dopey hadn't happened and I had heard he relapsed, because I thought he was so exceptional. But now my life is totally linked to his, you know, and I'd never expected that. Like people, strangers all over the world write me about Chris, you know, every day, you know, and it's like, it's very, very weird. And it's just sad, that I guess another thing, and it's just a weird sort of metaphysical, spiritual thing, is as a human being, I feel things and I think things, and you don't, even if you know that somebody dies, you don't feel like life is ever going to end. And when somebody stops living and they're not around, it's just a weird thing. And somehow I didn't have this. I mean, my mother died 10 years ago, and it wasn't the same kind of thing when Todd or when Chris died. It's like them not being here, it just seems so unnatural. And I was driving here, and I was driving very scared from where my dad lives to Great Barrington, because, like, I'm not a great driver, and, like, it's getting dark, and I don't know where I'm going, and I don't know how to use the Bluetooth, so I don't know directions, and I'm holding the phone, and I'm certain I will die at every turn. And we get to I get to Massachusetts, and the rain kind of stops, and it's like 7:30, so the sun's going down, but it's really bright tonight. You know what I mean? Like, it was really gray all day, and I'm driving here, and the sun's going down, and it becomes like super bright, like you're on a plane or something. You know, like when you go above the clouds and the sun hits you. And I look to the left, and there's this tremendous rainbow, and I'm just like, and I'm not like, you know, Chris would always say he was going to heaven, and I would kind of laugh at him. But when I saw the rainbow, I kind of was like, is that Chris? You know what I mean? Like, is Chris laughing at the fact that I'm scared to drive to Great Barrington? And also, like, that Chris always wanted to do this in Great Barrington. And like, it wasn't going to happen until he died, and we have to honor him. But I think the reason it wasn't going to happen is I was too scared to drive here, frankly. Like, I'm serious. The shit gets me nervous. Driving home, I'm fucking scared. Like, because that was another one of my favorite Chris stories, is we were talking about, it was after Todd had died, and I had to drive to Saratoga in the middle of the night. Basically, I had to drive back in the middle of the night, and I was just terrified of dying. And I would say, because Chris every week or every month would come to Manhattan, and he would drive home to Boston at 1 a.m. And I'd be like, dude, like, how would you do that? And he'd be like, well, I would doze off, and I would get really scared, and I'd hit myself in the face, and then I would drink a Coke, and I would stop, and I'd get some coffee, and I'd kind of doze off and hit myself in the face. And there was only one way that I could stay awake, and that's if I drifted to the rumble strip. And the rumble strip would give me a kick of whatever you call it.
It's like the most
adrenaline.
ever. That's the most fucked up thing. The fact that he would doze off and hit the rumble strip was the one thing that would keep him awake to drive. Like, he did it every month. It's fucking stupid.
That's just Chris.
Bro. Yeah. It's just...
Mark, you haven't said anything. What do you got? I mean, you know, you love.
I got a lot of.
Give me some thoughts. What do you got?
Different thoughts. I went to the beach last weekend, and I was with a girl that he dated, and we were like in the waves, and we were like talking about some bigger waves, and it reminded me of this time we were in Anguilla, and we were trying to stand up and like hold our ground against like 8-foot waves, and like Chris got tossed. And like he landed on his ass, and he thought he ripped his ass open. He said his ass was bleeding. Yeah. He was standing on shore, and like, I don't know. I thought he was serious, but he walked it off. But she was telling me that when he moved back to Boston, and they were like still talking, that he was lonely. And like when I used to think like he was going on to do like bigger and better things, get his degree, you know, do what he wanted to do. Like I didn't think much of it, but. For her to say that he was lonely, he missed this, when, in my opinion, he was like, you know, doing things that were far cooler than this. You know what I mean? Not really, but like, it was kind of like, in my eyes, it was more productive. But like, just makes me think that like, maybe he wasn't happy doing that. I don't know. I remember I saw him like maybe a week before he died, and I was like, man, I'm like that. Like that podcast is killing you. I'm like, that's too much driving, and he didn't say anything about it. I forgot what he said, but he kind of like shrugged it off, like everyone was saying that he was good at like avoiding the question. But he looked terrible, and I wished it was something I could have said. I remember when Alex told me about what happened, I was like, it like took my breath away. And this past year, I've been wondering like how you've been doing. And I haven't listened to the show as much as I'd like to, but maybe I'll start. But there's moments where I think of him. I think of him a lot, like at least once a week. I'm like, man, that was weird. Kind of, I don't know when and where I think about him, but it's always in my mind that he's not. It's so weird to think that he's dead. I can't.
Well, it's funny you
can't put my finger on it.
Well, it's funny you say that. You know, when he was out in Boston and he said he's lonely, and you were thinking like maybe he wasn't really happy out there. And yeah, I feel like, you know, who knows? I feel, you know, Chris, whenever he was in school to get his like, you know, doctorate in psychology, and I feel like part of him was just doing that because there's this, and I think a lot of us in life do that. There's just this expectation like, oh, I can't hang around here forever. I have to go do bigger and better things. And I think some of that was going on for Chris, because I would always ask him about school, and he was just so uninterested in it. I would be like, so, you know, what, like 10 years from now, like, what do you want to do with your life? Do you see yourself as a therapist? He would honestly, no. He's like, I just want to, like, do Dopey. Like, that's literally what he would say. It's like, I just want, like, he didn't, like, it never felt like he had these ambitions to, like, be a clinical psychologist. He wanted to write. He wanted to do Dopey. And so I feel like there was probably, my sense is that there was just like all of us, he had this expectation that like, oh, I can't stay here forever. I need to go and get my degree. I need to go and do this. I need to be in Boston. I need to be in New York, you know? And so.
The night before he died, me and him like weren't getting along. You know, me and him like we were fighting, and like because he wasn't driving to do Dopey. Like we did like 3 episodes on the phone, and he hated doing episodes on the phone, but he was just like, you know, I can't do it. Then he told me he was going to take Annie and them to a Taylor Swift concert instead of do Dopey. I was like, what? I was so angry. And like, and then he was like, well, why don't you come to Boston? And I was like, well, I have a family and I can't go to Boston. We had just bought a house. We had just had a baby. I was like, I can't go to Boston. And then he was like, I know, but I don't want to be the bad guy. And then I think he was high as shit. And I like, you know, I'm not Mr. I thank God for this. I thank God for that. But that night, it was the night before he died. It was late at night, and I was sitting on my porch, and he cried to me, and he said, I don't even give a shit about school. I just want to do Dopey. I'm doing it to get letters after my name. I'm doing it to please his family, to please the thing inside of him that felt the shame that you're talking about. It was like this crazy, and then again, he was all spun out, so who knows what the fuck, if what he was saying was true. But I do know that for me, he told me he loved me. He told me how much he loved the show. It was like incredibly meaningful to me. We were in all of these fucking pitiful fights about like a couple, like a married couple trying to figure out how we're going to be separated and raise our kid or whatever because we can't do it. And then we had this like beautiful talk, and it was like, and the thing was, he knew that they were drug testing him the next day. And he was kind of like just making his final desperate plea kind of thing. And I remember, it trivializes it, but I always wanted to tell this little dumb story that reminds me of him. I never play video games on my phone, and except I played Word with Friends, and Chris was like, did you guys ever play Words with Friends with Chris?
He was amazing.
It's amazing. It was he's on a fucking dictionary with that.
Yeah, he was cheating.
He was, right?
I mean,
Did
I
it ever
don't know.
come
He
out?
said he would. No, he would just there's that little feature that lets you know if you've played the most strong word possible. So he would sit there and every move. He was doing some shit. I don't know.
He was so good at Words with Friends.
He also had genuine online Words with friends that he knew about their personal life. It lasted for years. They would play each other. He'd ask about their families. It was weird.
He also played Clash of the Clans constantly, and I was always like, I need a game. So when me and Chris started, when Chris was using, I started playing this game called Holio. I don't know if you guys have heard of this game, but the point of the game is you're a hole, okay? It's a very addicty game. You're a hole, and you wander around a city sucking things up. And as things fall into you, you become a bigger hole, and you can suck bigger things into you until you can suck buildings into you, and you can suck cars into you, and you can suck parks into you. And I remember I had put my daughter to bed, and she was asleep, and I was lying next to her playing this whole game where I'm sucking down buildings, and Chris is texting me what a dick I am that I won't go to Boston. And it was just, there's something about it that was just, I don't know, it was that's a crazy metaphor, this whole thing, and I don't know what I was going to say. And I don't remember what I was going to say in the first place, but I just know that I don't know what the fuck I was going to say. What was I talking about? Do you remember?
I'm not sure. I do have a story.
Thank you. Please save me. Save me.
Kind of change gears a little bit.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about if I was going to share this or not. And, since Chris died, I think about him all the fucking time, constantly thinking about him, thinking about funny shit that we would have cracked up at, thinking, oh, Chris would have loved this, Chris would have loved that, as I'm sure all you guys do. And I have dreams multiple nights a week with Chris and them. I'm always fucking thinking about him. And, I'm a pretty spiritual person, and so there's this store in Great Barrington called Crystal Essence, and they sell, crystals and spiritual books and all sorts of, silly shit. Kind of cool shit, but it's sort of silly shit. And Chris and I used to go in there all the time, and so it was we'd go in, we'd look around, and so it kind of had this, we loved Crystal Essence. It was a cool thing to do when you're in early recovery. And I saw a few months ago that I got an email because I had bought something from there years ago, signed up for their email list, and that there was a medium coming in, and she she contact the afterlife, whatever. And so it's something that I've always been sort of fascinated by, somewhat skeptical of. Chris and I went to a psychic one time in New York, and it was total bullshit. So I know that there's total bullshit out there. I've also just been fascinated about it, and so I was after debating for a while, I was you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna sign up and go to this medium and just see what happens. And so a big motivation of that, my dad passed away when I was younger. My stepdad passed away a few years ago, and Chris had obviously just passed away. And so, a major motivation of that was to see if I could go to this medium and, talk to Chris. And so it was, I don't know how much in depth I'm going to go, but, I guess there's some bits of it I want to share. I certainly went into it with, somewhat skeptical, with a grain of salt, just kind of what is this? And we sat down. She kind of took me through this whole procedure of like, think of a few people to, call to your mind that you want to make a connection with. And I was definitely like somewhat kind of had these like walls up, kind of like, who is this lady? What's her deal? And so like,
was your plan to do your dad, your stepdad, and Chris?
Yes, my plan was my stepdad, my dad, and Chris. So she said, think of 3 people. And so, as I was doing this, I'm like, I'm going to give this like a total shot. I'm going to try and just like trust myself and just like see what comes up. If it's bullshit, it's bullshit. But whatever. I'm going to come in with an open mind. Because I think if you ever go into something like that, convinced it's bullshit, you're only going to see evidence that it's bullshit, right? And so I tried to keep a total open mind. And, I thought of, Chris, my dad, my stepdad. And so, she takes me through a little breathe, take a few deep breaths. And then she pulls out this little tarot deck. I pull a little card. She starts saying some shit. Then all of a sudden, she, like, literally out of nowhere is like, okay, so she's like, somebody wants to come through. I forget her exact words, but she basically was like, do you have, and I didn't tell her who the 3 people I wanted to talk with were. I just had them in mind. She's like, did you have a friend who died accidentally? And I was like, my friend Chris, he overdosed. And she instantly started talking all about it. And so again, like, take this with a grain of salt.
Did he have pants? He called his eating pants.
No, didn't ask that. But she went into like all, she, right off the bat, she was like, and it's hard for me to even talk about this. It really is, because like it's super personal for me. I know there's some people who are like, this is total bullshit. But again, I'm just trying to keep an open mind. She was, she was saying that, he wants you to know it was a total accident. It didn't expect to happen. She went into all sorts of detail about like, sorry, it's just hard talking about this and like remembering all the details. But she was saying that he it was a total accident, and that he feels he let all sorts of people down, but at the same time that there was like some like higher purpose going on for like why this happened. And it was a lot. My brain was sort of like tuning a lot of this out. So I was kind of like in the state of like, what the fuck is she telling me right now? And then she started going into like, she started asking me randomly, she was like, was he into pets? And I was like, was he into animals? And I was like, I don't really know. And she's like, and then I was like, well, yeah, actually he was. She's like, I'm seeing with him a cat right now. And Chris was, for you guys who know Chris, he was like a huge cat guy, right? And then she was saying that, and I'm really allergic to cats. And so last time I was in Boston with Chris, he had a cat in his family's house, and Blackie, yes. And he had a cat, and he was Chris, and I'm super allergic, and he knew that. And so, like, as I'm sleeping, he's like, oh, let me go get you a blanket and a pillow. And he, like, hands it to me, and it's, like, covered in cat hair. And he thought it was the funniest thing ever. He's literally, like, hysterically laughing. And it just became this inside joke with us that he was like, I'm going to get the stuff that's covered in cat hair for you. And so he would always, like, allude to, like, oh, there's cat hair all over that couch. And, like, anytime I went on a trip with him, he's like, oh, there's cat hair on that bed. There's cat hair on that pillow. Just because, like, fuck with me. And so this woman, and again, I'm sorry for not being clear, because it's sort of like a blur. I was literally sort of in this, like, weird, like, is this bullshit? Is this real? I don't know. But I did feel this kind of, like, comforting sense as she was, talking about Chris. But she's like, I'm seeing him, and I'm seeing him brushing dander and laughing. And I was just like, oh my God. I swear to God. Like, I didn't tell this woman anything. And she was like, I'm seeing him, like, she's like, I have a vision of him brushing hair and laughing. And she kept going into, like, how great of a sense of humor he had and how wonderful of a person he is. And he wants us to know that he's not here, but he's, like, out there. And he's, like, doing his thing, and his soul is on. It was, like, really heavy out there shit that was, like, hard for me to take in. And she went into all sorts of more shit about, like, my dad and my stepdad, shit that, like, she couldn't have possibly known. Like, I don't feel like going into so much detail. If you have questions about it, I'm happy to go into it, but, like, it was wild.
It seemed incredible.
I was sobbing. Like, right. It was really, like, to the point, and again, I've probably, like, as I listen to this, I'm probably going to be like, oh my God, there's so much I fucking left out, because I'm kind of, like, nervous talking about this, but, like, I was literally, like, sobbing throughout the whole thing, and she was relaying all these messages, and all this stuff about Chris, and all this stuff about my dad, and all this stuff about my stepdad. It was such, like, a powerful moment for me that, like, made me, like, for me personally, like, validation that, like, kind of like what Alex was saying earlier about, like, his molecules out there and sort of, like, the rainbow thing. Like, I have moments all the time where I'm like, oh, that's fucking Chris. Like, I really do. I frequently will, like, feel things, and I just get this sense that, like, I have this connection to him. I don't know. It's really personal, but, like, that was a really, like, powerful moment for me that opened my mind up to, like, some out there shit.
Right, and it's crazy. Like, I'm kind of scared of the idea of going to a medium, and I'm gonna be, like, so cynical.
It was weird, dude. Like,
Yeah, but it sounds incredibly powerful. I tend to like be walking down the street and see somebody that kind of looks like him, or see all these people I see look like him and Todd all the time, and I think, oh my God, like it could just be them. Or like I'll be at work and Chris and Todd used to come to my job all the time, and I could just imagine them coming in, and like they're not gonna come in again, but like the idea of like I hate the medium thing because like maybe you spoke to one who has the gift. You
Totally.
know? I mean, like,
there's some bullshit out there.
and it's like, and they fucking get over on people's suffering, and that fucking really disturbs me. But obviously, like I would love to talk to Chris. There was a listener in the show who had gone to see a medium, and she said that the medium was talking to Chris to her. And I was like, get the fuck out of here. I was like, I got angry at her. I was like, I don't want to fucking hear about it. You know what I mean? Because it's like, why would Chris be talking to this woman? But like, maybe Chris is just talking to fucking mediums all day. Maybe that's what he's doing now.
Yeah.
He's like on the fucking press circuit for fucking mediums everywhere. I could see him doing that and laughing his ass off, you know, Dr. Drew's wife, who all of a sudden, like, I'm kind of friendly with, is like this big into the paranormal medium world. We could do something with her if we wanted to try.
I mean, I don't know. It was heavy. Like, it was really heavy. Funny, though, is Chris was somewhat into it. Like, Chris went to a medium, I remember, like, years ago. And he might have even been over the phone. I can't remember. He got referred to some woman who's apparently supposed to be really good. And turns out it was total bullshit. But funny story is that she was saying to him, because Chris at the time didn't have a girlfriend, and he was really like, you know, wanted a girlfriend. He was asking this medium, like, you know, when am I going to get a girlfriend? When am I going to meet somebody? And her answer was, within the next 6 months, you are going to meet somebody who has green eyes, skinny fingers, and has a G in their name. And so Chris, at that point, was literally on a pursuit to, like, find skinny-fingered, green-eyed girl with a G in her name.
He'd be like on Tinder.
Yeah,
like,
no.
Yeah, well, what's the
That's
diameter of your
exactly
ring
it.
finger?
It became like a running joke. Like he'd be like, "Oh, I'm like talking to this girl. I'm like, how slender are those fingers?"
I remember,
not slender.
I remember him meeting girls on Tinder, and no joke, asking. I'd be with him when I was hysterically laughing. He'd be like, "Do you have skinny fingers?"
Well, the funny thing about that is, you know, the girl thought Chris was like hung up on finger size, not that that he saw a medium.
Right.
I love that. That's so funny. Fucking anybody have like a classic Chris story that they didn't tell that was on the back of their heads? Alex? No? You're letting me down, Alex? Come on, Alex. No, I'm gonna pause it.
I'll tell a story about myself. Chris really liked this story.
Good.
And I don't know, I was thinking about it the other day. So I got sober really young, but anyway, I was like...
How old were you?
When I got sober, I was 18.
How old are you now?
I'm 25. So I remember when I was 18, I was still getting high. I remember I was such a mess. I was dating this girl. I was on Long Island, where I'm from, where my parents live, and I was at my parents' house. You know, like I was with them. I think it was like on school break or something. And you know, everybody, like my parents, this girl, like I'm not getting high or anything, right? Like that's what I'm telling them anyway. I at this time I was taking a ton of LSD. I was like almost every day, just like dropping out, you know, and I fucking came up with this plan. Like, you know, my friend texted me. He's like, "I'm good." You know, like I was really excited, right? Like, so I go over to his house. I tell my parents I'm going to hang out with the girl. I tell the girl I can't go out. You know, I'm stuck at home, kind of thing. And I go to this guy's house, and we start getting fucked up. We're just like, it was ripping his bong. Like, I eat a few Xanny bars, like, you know, and then he like breaks out the LSD, and you know, I take a couple hits, and I'm really excited. My whole purpose was to like get the LSD and then like leave. You know, it wasn't to hang out with this guy. I didn't particularly like hanging out with him. And anyway, he's like, so after I'm kind of fucked up and we're about to trip, and I'm trying to make my exit. He's like, oh, I just gotta like make this deal real quick, like 2 seconds, like we'll be in and out kind of thing. He takes me to this crack den, right, and like we're just getting wicked fucked up. I'm like kind of freaking out because I'm starting to trip, and like we're just in this like really sketchy place. And I get this call from my girlfriend, and she's like, I look at my phone, like I have like 10 missed calls from her, like 10 missed calls from my parents, and I'm tripping balls. And I'm just like, oh my God. And I call her back, and like she's like yelling at me on the phone, and I'm like, I'm all fucked up, and I'm just like, well, like maybe you like I work it out so she's gonna pick me up. And so I like leave the house, I go wander away to the street where she's gonna pick me up. And I remember I was tripping so hard, and I was on this road. It was kind of a busy intersection, but it was really late. It was like 1 a.m. or something, and the road was just empty. And I had this feeling in my head. It's totally like just a thing from tripping. It was just like this was the last road in existence, kind of thing. Like that's what I thought. And I remember telling Chris that, and he just loved that so much. That would always like come up later in our conversations. It's like this is the last road ever, kind of thing. And that was, I don't know. That was just he loved that story. I was thinking about it earlier.
Wait, that reminds me, and then I'll shut up because I know I've been talking a lot. That reminds me, Chris loved this story. One time I was tripping, and I had this big set of headphones on. And those pictures of, like, there's, like, posters that used to be really popular of, like, apes wearing, like, headphones? Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you seen that? Okay, so I had one it was in college, in my dorm. And I remember, like, just tripping balls with these giant headphones on. And Chris used to love this. He would just crack up every time I told him this. And I remember thinking, I was like really in like deep thought. I was like, I wonder how God views me. And then I like look up at this ape wearing these same headphones I'm wearing. And I was like, what the fuck? And like, Chris just thought that shit was the funniest thing in the world.
That is too funny, man. Fucking Chris loved tripping more than anybody. That was his thing. Like when I was sober and he was in the halfway house, he was like, and I don't even know why he called me because like he knew I was sober and he knew like what I was doing, and he was like, it's like, Dave, you want to take some acid with me? And I was like, no, I don't want to take acid. He's like, all right, we'll just get some dope. Fuck it, we'll just get some dope. And I was like, dude, we can't get fucking dope. I want to read this email I got, and it's not particularly pertinent to this conversation, but I wanted to read an email while we were on it, and what the hell. Anyway, so this woman writes, hi there. I started your podcast last week, and I started from episode 1, currently on episode 55. I stopped going to meetings in 2008 after having 1 year clean because the fellowship in my area felt fake and forced. It's been hard to discuss my time using with anyone who has never been there. I think most addicts in recovery often fall into a holier-than-thou headspace, while the others end up in a dark and twisted sense of humor. I ended up being gifted with the latter and now have a pretty fucked up sense of humor. Where I find humor in my dark and dangerous past, others seem shocked and horrified. It's been really nice to find other addicts who can laugh about the past. Meeting rooms were always such a pissing contest, who was the worst, while also being sure to tell people not to laugh at their past because it could only glorify the war stories and drug use. I also love that both of you are super intelligent. Often addicts are looked at as being uneducated and dumb, and it really isn't the case most of the time. Do normies understand the amount of scheming and planning it takes to be a functional addict? LOL, or as Chris would say, lol. If anything, most of us could fake our own deaths and get away with it. Anyways, I'm sorry about Chris. It's lovely hearing his voice on the show. What a fun and lighthearted man. Keep it up, Dave. I appreciate everything. From California, Katie. Which it's a beautiful email. Thank you, Katie, for writing it. And you guys are around this stuff all the time. Like, how important is regular meeting attendance? Like, I mean, for me, I know that when I don't go to meetings, like my whole I go crazy. I start thinking about stupid stuff all the time. I need to go to meetings to stop thinking about stupid stuff, basically. And I think Chris stopped going, and he would always talk about how he stopped sharing at meetings because he was scared that if he was sharing at meetings, all he was trying to do was either like pick somebody up, make somebody laugh, outdo somebody, sound smarter than the smartest person. Like, how does meetings work for you guys? Do you still go to meetings? Still?
Yeah, for sure.
And like, what do you take away from that thought?
So to tie it into something Colin said earlier that really hit me, which like exemplified kind of my favorite parts of Chris, which is that like, so in like the industry or the world of helping and just like the atmosphere of being kind to people, there's like, it's great to be brilliant, and like I do try to hone myself to understand recovery material to be that much more helpful and useful and whatever and intelligent. But Colin was talking about just going into Chris's room and lying there, and I was like picturing like a time-lapse video, because I used to do that. I used to just go into Chris's room and just lie on the floor. I would just like barge myself in and just lie on his floor next to him. He'd be vaping, watching Star Trek. Sometimes he wouldn't even say anything. I'd get a call and leave, and that was it. And there was the ability Chris had. He was clearly smart. He was clearly funny. But above all, he like held space for you in a way that I admire so much and that like I really kind of want to pursue. And so similarly, my experience in meetings, there's like some kind of energy I just get when I'm just there, when I'm just amongst people who I know understand me and don't judge me. There's just like such value in that. And then it happens, similar to Chris, and I think I want to backtrack for a second too, where Chris did love school. There was like an element of him that fucking loved picking apart psychology. He loved being like, oftentimes he loved pushing against what they were teaching him, but at the end of the day, he needed to be cognitively stimulated. Like he did, and he loved it. And there was clearly like two parts of him. One part that wanted to do Dopey and write and fucking eat Ben and Jerry's. And there was another part of him, though, that did want to be an academic and wanted to dive deep into this stuff and thought it was really interesting. And like his favorite movies were all metaphysical, and he loved spirituality. And that's why acid was his favorite fucking drug, because he was so bored with this three-dimensional bullshit that he wanted 7 dimensions and fucking rocketed into those dimensions. And like, you know, that's what he wanted. He was so bored with like mundane existence. So for me, meetings offer me all of that. They offer me security. They offer me like a feeling of just like I'm home. Anywhere I am in the world, I walk in and I hear the preamble and my blood pressure goes down by 30%.
Right.
I also understand that's me, and like not everybody's going to have that exact experience, and I don't like care if you go necessarily. I care about you, so I hope you do take care of yourself.
I understand.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. That's another thing that like Chris and I would talk about, and it's something that, you know, it's something that's hard for me to say on the show because we reach, you know, addicted people and people who struggle and stuff. And I always, especially lately, especially in the wake of all the deaths, I say, when people say, well, what can you do for somebody? I always say, like, there's nothing you can do, really. You know, you can, I think the way you described Chris, what Chris did for you guys, just being, and that's why he would have been an amazing clinician, even if he didn't think he would have been. Once he got past trying to prove himself, he would have been just a magnet for everybody and a safe space for everybody to be able to say anything. Because even if he didn't have an answer besides like, you better get your shit together, or like, let's get something to eat, once he got through the bullshit, he would have hit something that would have just made you feel like you were a part of. And Chris knew that more than anything with meetings, was that once somebody told him they were happy he was there, he was like, what a great thing. Somebody wants me here. And I know that you guys provided that for him in his life where he didn't have that in his life. Like I didn't know Chris. I don't think I knew Chris as well as you did, or at least I wasn't as close with him for as long as you guys were, but I did spend a ton of time with him in the last few years, and I did really listen to him. And when he would talk about his friends, he didn't talk about anybody besides you guys. You know, and what that tells me is that before, am I wrong? I mean, he didn't really talk. I mean, did he tell you guys about old friends?
Yeah, here and there. I mean, it was more stories like about things that happened, you know, and like other people were involved.
Right, but I'm saying like when he went here, it was like you guys found him, and he found that he was valuable to you guys, and he was part of it. And it's like when you talk about different pockets of the country, and that this one just happened to be the one that was right for him. That's the truth. I just think that that I get scared that there is nothing that anybody can do for anybody. But then when I say what I just said, that's the answer, that you can just be there for them and hope for the best, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe that. I think there's a lot we can do for each other.
Well, good, because that's your business.
Well,
I mean, that's your life.
Yeah.
You know, I try. I just have this sad kind of feeling like that somebody slips away, gets too much of a fucking chemical, and they're gone forever. You know, like what a scary, scary, grim reality that is. And it's not the nice kind of lighthearted, uplifting message I want to put on Dopey. It's just a shame because that's what happened in this scenario.
Well, also look at the village that it took to get Chris back when he relapsed in New York. It took fucking, 40 people involved in him getting back into treatment? All of whom spent, like, days of their lives in pursuit of his being safe again, which he ultimately was, against every single bone in his body. He did not want any of it. Yet, he wound up being like, thank God everyone helped me. And he had a real shot. It didn't end up, we got another 4.5 years out of it. But, like, he could have had another 75 years. Like, who knows? Because of Ted and Colin and all the people that showed up in his dark, and especially his family, too. His family's been nothing but, like, the most supportive throughout his entire journey. And they're an incredible, like, group of people. Yeah. And, like, if it wasn't for their, like, unwavering support, he would have been dead at fucking 18.
Over and over again.
You know?
And this is going to sound like, and you're not going to want to hear this, but I'm going to say it anyway. When they go to you to do the eulogy, like, what does that do to you personally?
That, I mean, the one thing that helped was that Matt, that people in his family were also doing, his brother and sister, both also said something. So I understood my role, which is to represent, like, this small group of us here. And then I'm probably just, like, the oldest, so I wound up being the one chosen. But,
You're very well spoken to.
Dylan, you're our leader. Come on, bro.
You're the leader. Leader. No, but what is it to be that? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and he was, you know, your sponsee, your friend, your brother, basically,
Yeah.
and you're the person to represent it. Like, what does it do to you? Like, what does it make you feel?
well, I mean, fear, honor, gratitude, a lot of fear. But
I know that thousands of people who listen to it on our show were so moved, and they never saw you, they never saw him. So your words, like, really did something. You know, they provided amazing comfort, and it was, I mean, my dad was there, and he was blown away by it. So, like, it's meaningful, and it's like, it's just so sad, you know, like our deal. You know, all of us are afflicted. You know, all of us could have died whenever we could have died, and we didn't. And now we're better for it, and we can help the next person. But not everybody gets that opportunity. You know,
some people get it, and then it doesn't work.
Right. So, like, how do you make sense of it? You don't. You don't? That's it? You're gonna go dead on me on the stupid show?
I have a weird, like, Chris story with meetings. It was a few months after he passed, and I spoke at a meeting local to here, and this kid was sharing afterwards, and he was like, he was talking. He said that he could relate a lot and all this stuff, and then he was like, I was at this same meeting like a year ago, and this guy spoke, and he was like bringing the house down. Everybody loved him. Everybody was laughing. He's like, and I wasn't really like feeling them, and then a sponsor of mine came up to me after the meeting and was like, that was Chris. Isn't that so weird?
That is weird.
Yeah.
Well, I think just to answer your question, like, how do you make sense of it? I think it's really fucking hard, and I think that it's different for different people. And I feel like I said, I brought this whole thing up with a medium. Like, for me personally, like, I just have a faith that there's like more to reality than we know, and that that things like the whole quote, like, God works in mysterious ways. Like, I believe that. I believe that there's a higher level of like reality going. I think that things happen for a reason, and we just don't often know those reasons. And yet it sounds like, why the fuck did Chris die? I have no idea, but I genuinely have this faith that there's much more that we don't know and we couldn't possibly know, and that it works out in the way it's supposed to. And I know it's hard for me to say, because like, why are my friends supposed to die? I have no fucking idea, but I just do have this faith that like I don't know what it is. I don't know what the lesson in it is. I'm still trying to figure that out, but I believe that there is one.
Yeah, I think like to talk about like meetings, and like you mentioned something about like Chris getting in his own head about like sharing in meetings and like sharing with like trying to look good or impress somebody or whatever. But like I've talked about Chris so many times in meetings for the past year. And like when I talk about him, that stuff goes away because it's so genuine, the feeling of like our friendship and our connection my entire sobriety. And then the loss that I felt, that like whenever I bring him up, there's like all these emotions. Like a lot of times when I'm able to talk about him in meetings, like there is this like sense of like peace and like happiness, and like it like channels me to be like as genuine as possible about the message that I'm sending. So it's almost like, I don't know, I believe that like there's this like energy transfer, like when Chris passed away, that like transfer to all of us, where you're continuing to do Dopey, right? You're continuing to talk about him, to process it, and it's like all this stream of consciousness, and I hope, and I know it's the case for me, where like it can kind of like self like disappears, and I like put that energy into like thinking about him and channeling a message that can hopefully help somebody else. And like I think of it that way, like that, like it's almost like a responsibility, but it doesn't even feel like a responsibility to keep on like passing that along.
No, I know what you mean. People say that to me all the time, and I don't ever feel like it's like a responsibility. I feel like it's what I have to do. And I feel like, I mean, I do Dopey because I love to do it. You know what I mean? Like I wanted to do it before it ever happened, and when he died, like there was no question in my mind that I was going to keep doing it. But what shocked me was how his death affected so many sick people, and like it really did help so many sick people. And it's like, I don't, I would trade all of them for him, you know what I mean? Because I'm fucked up, and like I miss him, and I miss how safe we used to. Dopey was really safe when me and Chris would do it. We'd sit in an apartment, eat food, have a stack of chocolate, laugh at every dumb thing we had done, close the shit. He'd drive home and fucking get hit the rumble strip and get whatever, and like that was our life. And it was like, somehow it was safe, and when he died, Dopey wasn't safe anymore. Dopey was like this site of this death and multiple deaths. And I do it because it's still fun. It's important to me because I'm sober, and I was a drug addict for so long that drug addicts know that a drug addict can be sober, that a drug addict can be in recovery. I love my life. I love my life sober. My life is way more fun sober than it was high. I get way higher sober than I ever got high. I just do. It's amazing. It's like, and if I heard somebody saying this shit before I got clean, I would have thought they were lying. But and I know that when Chris was at his best, he felt exactly the same way. And he would say it in such an awesome way on the show. He would say, if recovery sucked, I wouldn't fucking do it. He would be like, if this wasn't good, if I wasn't going to be happy, joyous, and whatever, what was restless, he said, if I was going to be restless, irritable, and discontent, I wouldn't do it. And then it conjures that kind of face of him when he was restless, irritable, and discontent. And I'm twisted. I want to put a nice bow on this thing and say his death makes other people better. But I go back to like, why did it have to happen to him? And it's like you said, it's a stream of consciousness. It's like there is no easy answer. He is our friend, and he had to die, and that's just the way it is. And like I think the most important thing for me is I stay sober because I like it. I stay sober because I wasted the first 41 years of my life, basically. And I'd like to live to a nice age where I had a good chunk of time where I could do things that I like to do. I don't know. I love Chris, and I wish he could have done it too, but that's not the way it's going to happen. And Dopey is about, the truth about addiction, and not a highfalutin truth, just sort of a bottom line truth. Some people don't make it, and sometimes it's funny, and sometimes it isn't. But I don't know. I think we covered a lot of ground. If there's anything that anybody hasn't said that they wish they had said, say it now. Oh yeah, we should call Ryan. Hold on. Thank you. Before we call Ryan, Colin has another story. Stories are the meat and potatoes of this show.
Yeah.
So if anybody has a story, Dylan came with the crazy stories. Mark, if you want us to tell a story, please do. Colin, give us this. Ted has to protect his life, which I don't blame him. Colin, give us a story.
Yeah. So yeah, just running off the theme of some of these guys who told stories that Chris loved to hear. Chris always loved this one. I don't know. He just like loves stories about like strippers and prostitutes. Like I said earlier, I used to steal from pharmacies, and I befriended this woman who was probably like 15 years older than me. We used to buy Coke off of her, and she was a stripper. She was like a 36-year-old stripper, so she was like pretty, like veteran stripper. And we'd always used to, me and my friend Pete, we'd always used to hang at her house. And she almost became this like motherly figure. I never I lost contact with my family on and off for years, and I was using, and I don't know, she took us in, and it got to the point she didn't have a license. She got a DUI, so I'd always drive her to the strip club out in Springfield. And there's this one point where like she like made this like kind of bargain with me. She's like, "I'll give you a deal on Coke if there's any way you can get me steroids from the pharmacy." So I was like, "I'll see what I can do." It took like a few weeks because of my system. I had to like find ways to do that. So I ended up giving this old stripper steroids, like anabolic stuff. I think it was like Winstrol or something like that. And she would give me deals on Coke. So we formed this bond. And one night we were all at her house, and I knew that she had a husband, but like I didn't know until after like where he actually was. He was in prison, and she gets a call, and all of a sudden she's in the kitchen, and she's just like jumping up and down, screaming, super excited. And she looks at me and Pete, and she goes, "You're not gonna believe this, but my husband's out, and he's 5 minutes away." And Pete and I look at each other. I mean, I'm like 20 years old. I'm like, oh my God. And she's like, "I can't wait for you to meet him. He's going to love you guys. It's going to be great. We're going to party." And I drove there with the pharmacy delivery van. And this dude walks in. And so to give a little background, this dude was a former SWAT team guy who was taking off the top. He was like busting guys, taking the drugs, reselling them on the street. He got caught, made like news all over upstate New York. I didn't know any of this. This dude walks in, he's like 6'5", an absolute machine. And he doesn't even say hello to her. Like, she's jumping all over him. He looks at both of us, and he just looks like directly at me, and he was like, "Who has the pharmacy van outside?" And I just like raised my hand. I'm like, "I do." And he was like, "You get me Oxy?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Get me Oxy right now." And Pete and I literally jump up and like run outside. And I look at Pete, I'm like, "We need to get the fuck out of here." We get in the van, and he's standing outside and then gets back into the truck that he pulled up in and follows us. So for the next like 10 minutes, Pete and I are panicking, just driving all through these back roads. It's actually right where you're going to be driving. And we ended up like losing this guy. And luckily I get away. I didn't get him any Oxy. I was like terrified. I never went back. Like I saw that woman like years later. He ended up like getting arrested for attempted murder, trying to kill her.
A young pharmacist in the street.
So yeah, Chris just like loved that story just because it involved like an old stripper.
Well, I think the fact that, I mean, the stories, Colin basically had to wait until some people died so he could get anabolic steroids in exchange for Coke from a stripper. I mean, that right there is just like the most ridiculous scenario ever.
Yeah, that's what Dopey's supposed to be. That's what Dopey's all about right there. That's the whole thing. Let's hear Ryan. Let's hear graphic design Ryan's final 2 cents on the first anniversary of Chris's death. And next year I'm going to be here on the same day, so I hope you guys can deal with that.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, bro.
Hello?
Hey, Ryan.
Hey, man.
So you're on the show.
Oh.
Welcome back.
What's up, Dopey Nation?
So,
Thank you.
What's up, Ryan?
Ryan.
Oh, hey, boys.
Hey, Ryan.
So Dopey Nation, if you don't remember, Ryan, when's the last time you were on Dopey?
Oh, God. I feel like I was like the 10th guest or something.
But you were on like 3 in a row or something. Ryan, first of all, Ryan created the Dopey logo, both versions. He did the Christmas logo. He did the July 4th logo. He's not called Graphic Design Ryan because he isn't a great graphic designer. But also, you were on the first episode where Todd called in, and Todd didn't know he was on the show, which might be my favorite episode. Do you remember
That's
that?
right.
Oh, man. So,
Well, my favorite part about that episode was that you, Todd was likely strung out, and you're like, well, Ryan's here, and Ryan's a recovery coach.
yeah.
So you should coach Todd.
Yeah.
And then just left it up to me, and I was like, what the fuck? Hi, Todd. What
Yeah, he wasn't
am
going.
I supposed to do with this?
Yeah, he wasn't going for it.
No, he was not. He wasn't sold.
So here we are. We're winding down on the anniversary of Chris's death episode, and I just wanted to see if you had a story about Chris or any kind of insight you wanted to depart us with.
Here's the funny thing about what I think my relationship with Chris was, is that unlike probably everyone who's in that room with you guys right now, is I didn't spend a ton of time with Chris one-on-one. By the time I got to phase 4, he was already gone. I never lived with him. By the time I got to Great Barrington, he was kind of already on his way out. And so what's interesting to me is like when I'm replaying how deeply I cared about him, it's partly because I can just sense, how big of a loss it is to the world that he's gone. Because I cared about him deeply, even having not spent a ton of time in proximity to him.
Well, I know that Chris, like, whatever the nature of your relationship was, he thought to bring you down. He thought to include you in everything, and you know what I mean? It was like he obviously thought a lot of the relationship.
No, absolutely, as did I. But just my point being, like, I don't really have a lot of Chris stories. I didn't spend a ton of time with him. I talked to him, and I felt, I think we were close, of course, but he just had that way of disarming you, and it was very easy to feel very comfortable and very close with him very quickly.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, he was an enigma, man.
He was, and that's going to do it. Unless anybody else has anything they want to yell at Ryan about. Anybody want to yell at Ryan about anything?
Turn your phone off.
All right, Ryan.
Maybe tomorrow. I'm trying.
Anyway, thank you for calling in. Let's just call it the end of the show now. So everybody, stay strong, Dopey Nation, and fucking toodles for Chris. Right?
Toodles.
All right, thanks, Ryan.
Yeah. Bye.
She's a good girl, loves her mama, loves Jesus, and America too. She's a good girl, brings about good. Until I get some money in my pocket, then I guess I'll just have to walk around my neighborhood. But I wanna be good so bad. Wanna be so good, so bad, so bad. I wanna be good so bad. Bad desire's all I ever had. And I wanna take a ride up in the sky. Watch this aeroplane just pass me by. And I wanna see a Lear jetliner take a dive, just to show all of these people what it means to be alive. But I wanna be good so bad. Wanna be so good, so bad, so bad. I wanna be good so bad. Bad desire's all I ever had. And my shadow's getting smaller and smaller. And it's time to know where I stand. Shadow's getting smaller and smaller. And it's time to know where I stand. And I wonder would they pay it any mind when I leave this busted city far behind. I'll take the high road, however far it winds, because peace and love are very, very, very hard to find. And I wanna be good so bad. Wanna be good so bad, so bad. I wanna be good so bad. Bad desire's all I ever had. Damn it, all these suckers make me mad. And it's all I ever had. And it's all I ever had. And these suckers make me mad, and I wanna call my dad. And it's all I ever had. 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 And these suckers make me mad, and it's all I ever had. And I wanna call my dad. And it's all I ever had. And it's all I ever had. And it's all I ever had.